Well, friends, welcome to this webinar. Oh, it's so good to be with you. Even though I can't see your faces, I feel you in that chat. I see people from all over the place. In fact, places that are near and dear to my heart, where I have lived before, you know who you are. And it's just so good to be together, friends. We need each other in this time, don't we? And I am thrilled to be with you today. I just want to say that we are going to be covering many things. This webinar is doing triple duty, really, and that is that it is a time for those who are already signed up for my planning retreat in September. This is sort of their first time together, this sort of get ready webinar. So it's kind of going to get our minds around what our task is this year in worship design. But it's also for many of you who are perhaps new to Worship Design Studio who are here, and I'm thrilled to have you. And it also is a time for me to let folks know that the Advent series, the Advent Christmas series from Worship Design Studio is in fact ready for you to begin digging in. So multitasking today, but most importantly, we are together. So I'm going to share my screen here and get started. And so friends, please, as Jenna said, open that chat and be talking to each other. Some of the most juicy stuff that happens in a webinar in the Worship Design Studio happens in the chat, and we do pull that wonderful content out and put that with the recording when we post the recording. So please do that. If you have direct questions that you'd like for me to address, as Jenna said, put that in the Q&A feature. It really helps her see that among rather than the chat. So friends, let's get started. In a nutshell, here's what I want you to know today. Number one, you are not alone. I mean, just look at the turnout for a conversation that's about how messy this moment is, right? So we are in it together, and we're going to affirm that together. And also the second thing is that we don't have to have all the answers. In fact, the trick is to get comfortable enough with this gooey, pupa DNA changing moment to allow things to form organically, not to manufacture something just so we can have an answer, because we're so needing an answer, and everything is changing so much. So to get comfortable in the goo, but not so comfortable that we get complacent, to keep our senses peeled and our eyes open for the unfolding of the possibilities. This is not a quick fix webinar, my friends, with just 5 how-to things to make your worship great in a time when it's kind of messy, but it's more holistic. How do we prepare for the work that we are in, that is ahead of us? Yes, I'm going to give you some concrete things, but it's also more holistic. So stick with me as I build this out during this webinar. And the antidotes for our aching hearts that don't know what to do in the midst of not having the answers is to get curious. Curiosity is the most important attribute that we can cultivate right now. You know, I have dealt with anxiety in my life. And so sometimes I will put a daily reminder that pops up on my phone. That's just the word wonder. And it has a double meaning. One is to just wonder at the beauty and awe around me, the abundance around me, but also to get curious. That thing I'm anxious about, I wonder how that will turn out, to turn anxiety into curiosity. And so this is something that entrepreneurs know at all times, not just in pandemic times, that curiosity is more important than intelligence, than answers. It's our greatest asset. And you are a spiritual entrepreneur, I call you, because we in this moment have to think about the circumstances right now and how we can do our jobs in ways that maybe we've never done them before, and continuing to try to find, even in this moment, when we've been doing that for the last year and a half, even in this moment, how can we do sustainable things that reach people where they are in this moment? So I'm going to be reporting on some of these attributes that I hope that we can cultivate in this time. I want to say that, the Worship Design Studio is a place where where we hopefully give folks resources and inspiration. And we are co-hosting this with practical resources for churches who are also our friends in helping to resource churches who have been incredible in this moment. And so we're so very happy to be co-hosting it with them. And I highly recommend to all of our Worship Design Studio folks, get to know PRC, and PRC folks, I hope you'll get to know Worship Design Studio through this. So, what will we cover? We're in a pupa stage, this metamorphosis moment, this metaphor that I am using because it's a lot and our DNA is changing. So we're going to talk about that. We're also going to talk about what we do, what this goo allows us to do. And we're going to play the game of what if. And I'm just going to tell you right now, the biggest what if that we're going to deal with in this time is what if we can take the pressure off of Sunday morning worship as the be all and the end all of what it is to be church, even though many of our denominations still think this is the metric of success, right? But what if we look more holistically at who we are as church? And I'm not saying we won't have worship and ritual content. Oh no, my passion is centered around being a ritual artist, a worship artist. And I know that we humans don't thrive without spiritual nurture of our rituals and provocative symbols to help us make meaning out of life. Even folks who don't go to church find ways to do that. But so many of us are twisted up right now because we're scared about what this moment in history is doing or going to do to Sunday morning. So what if we release that pressure? You know, there's a saying that says expectations are premeditated resentments. I'll say that again. Expectations are premeditated resentments. And if my expectation is that we're supposed to be doing things this one way, and we can't get back to that, and we're so anxious about that, we have all kinds of expectations around this, and we're prevented from doing that, then I can get full of resentment. And when we get into resentment, we have the tendency then to look for someone to blame, right? And we can see that in our congregations. Many of you have told me that it's just so difficult because people want answers. They want you to have answers, and you don't have answers. So it's the hardest thing, and yet it is the simplest thing to release resentment by releasing the expectations. So what we're going to play in this what if game today is what if we explored many ways to reach people where they are and not just wring our hands and fret over the fact that not everybody's coming back to the sanctuary right now. And so that leads us, if we can let go of that expectation and begin to dream about different ways to reach people with our provocative symbolism and messages of good news in other ways as well as Sunday morning, then what other what ifs does that unleash and unfurl and unfold, just to use some of the metamorphosis metaphoraging. So, you know, this is the thing that I want us to do in this time. If you can, take a deep breath and begin to let go or at least examine what are those expectations that are creating anxiety and resentment in me right now that's then preventing me from being curious and from being creative. All right, so we'll also talk about 3 concrete things that we can cultivate right now in the meantime. In other words, in this gooey moment, before we kind of know what our answers are to our curiosity questions. What can we do? 3 concrete things. We're going to recognize how history helps us to move forward. It's a new age. I believe it's a new age. This is the dawn of a new age. We already knew that we were kind of in a new age, but pandemic has turbo boosted that. So how can we lean on history in the past to help us see the future? And we're going to reaffirm purpose and explore possibilities. I am going to give you some concrete ideas, not that everything works for everyone, but in this time of exhaustion, when you may feel like your ability to be creative is suffering, you know, that's where my vocation kicks in. It's always been my vocation to dream, to infuse, to inject some creativity on your behalf when you're needing some ideas, even if my ideas don't work exactly for your context. And that's pretty much a given. in a webinar when hundreds of people are on. It will hopefully spark some ideas for you and get just get you thinking about some things. So I got a lovely email just this week from someone, and I'm always so gratified to hear that what we do in the Worship Design Studio is making your life better. Same for PRC and all of their webinars. And I'm so glad that we can be on this journey with you. WDS was a lifesaver for me over this past year. I'm not sure I could have gotten through this last year without it. I do know you stirred creativity in me that I was sure was dried up. Thank you. Well, I get dried up as well, and I have had those moments. I am with you, my friends. But I also have been doing some things, practicing what I preach, in order to get some of those creative juices flowing again. And so I'm going to share some of those things that I have been doing that perhaps if you do them, then it will get your creative juices going as well. But first, we are going to, before we get to these three things that I've been spending my creativity on, the sanctuary enhancing ideas for worship, the community facing ideas for worship, the rhythm flexible ideas for worship. Let's take a moment first to take a deep breath. And let our senses take in a metamorphosis vision alongside some scripture. Now, those of you who've been following the lectionary in these last few weeks may have been preaching on the letter to the Ephesians. And Ephesians is such a wonderful text. And so I pulled some Ephesians out for us in this time of reflection to get us centered. I always, as if you've been on webinars with me before, I always light a candle. So if you have one nearby, go ahead and do that, because learning and education is not always just about the things we say, but also the things we feel and the ways that we check in with our spirits. And so let's check in with our spirits in just this way for right now. So some images and some words from Ephesians to give us courage. Holy and living God, wily Spirit, fill us. Teacher, Rabbi, Savior Jesus, be with us as we move and grow and change. For you have planted within us the ability to transform. to bring the good news to all who desperately need it in ways that we have not yet thought of or have imagined. Root us and ground us in your love. We pray this in your many names. Amen. All right, friends. Well, I did a bit of customer discovery or listening. We're going to talk about that attribute in a moment. But I did a little survey of some folks in the worship design studio about the goo of this moment. And I just want to share a few of them. This goes with that. In a nutshell, you are not alone. People are feeling anxious, creative energy down, decreased attendance makes it seem like church is irrelevant. But I believe in hope and God's love is what's needed in the world. Yes. Feeling disoriented. I thought the finish line for this marathon was near, and now I'm trying to find the energy to go a few more miles. What a great metaphor, especially after watching those marathons on the Olympics. With the low numbers of folks in our in-person service, it's hard to feel energized. Yeah. So again, going along with that expectation, if we're used to something being a certain way and it's not, it's really sometimes difficult to make that shift. So some other things, it's a mix. Yes. Oh my gosh. Any one moment or day, in a new ministry and excited, hopeful at times, disappointed and tired of navigations with twists and turns, ups and downs. But I love this. They said, but like Gloria sings, I will survive. Amen. So feeling unsure of myself. Oh yes. What this does to our self-esteem, because we're trained for something specific, right? And it's always hard when we feel like we're constantly doing something new, because it takes, as you know, muscles twice as long or twice as much energy to do something new as it does something that they've done over and over again. And so we're expending a lot of energy. So, DNA is changing, slowing way down is a balm. I loved this one. I love them all, but this is really important for us to hear. Embracing contemplative discernment, resting with eyes wide open, expecting to be surprised by the illuminated path where there was none before, paused on the threshold, inspiring and harrowing. Amen. It's just so hard to stay in that place. And that's the thing. It's a prolonged period. And that is what's so difficult, especially using that marathon metaphor. We thought we were seeing the finish line, and then we realize we have a ways to go. So these are all really wonderful. And those of you who haven't gone to that survey or that question where all these comments are in the Worship Design Studio website, I invite you to do that. I think Jenna can put the link in the chat. But it's, oh, wait a second. The one I just went away. Let me say something about that first. Oh, I think I don't have my
Marsha, video. Your video is off.
Yes, I just realized that. Thank you. I was enjoying not seeing myself. At any rate, the one that was just there, somebody said, perfect is canceled. I love that. Can we just say amen to that? Perfect is canceled. Yes. And that probably is a good life lesson anyway, pandemic or not. Perfect is canceled. And the Holy Spirit is let loose. So, if you haven't gone there, it's really a great idea to go and look at these, just to feel like you're not alone and to chime in and give each other some support. That's one of the things that in the Worship Design Studio is just a great thing, is that you are not alone and you never have to start from scratch. We are there to help each other. So you can see that many of these things are alike. And so what it means is that we're not alone. So this one is a really important thing that launches us into the next point. And one such change is how they view themselves as a church. Is it only 1 hour on Sundays, or is it Monday through Saturday too? Hello. This is what I'm saying, is that this is an opportunity for us to remember that church is not just Sunday morning worship. Can we be the church without sitting in a pew in worship? If we can rethink what it means to be church, that is one major portion of the change factor, at least for my congregation. Looking forward to the conversation. Yes, indeed. That's absolutely right. So my friends, we are in the midst of what I call decision fatigue. Our lives actually got simpler. I don't mean that we didn't expend energy during the lockdown, but in terms of deciding where we're going to go, if we're going to go, what offerings to say yes to, what to say no to, we actually got pretty simplified and focused. And now with things reopening, we have to make a ton of decisions that are actually pretty hard. So we are in decision fatigue. So give yourself another deep breath and remember that there's a reason why we feel exhausted. So one of the things in Ephesians that's rooted and grounded brings another Olympic example to mind. That's Simone Biles. She got the twisties, right? And it's okay, she said, to step back, to pause, to get your bearings. There's no shame in admitting that you need to regroup, that you need whatever you need, and to push through sometimes is going to be more dangerous to you, to your well-being. And so I just thought that was so extraordinary and such a great metaphor that we're all in the twisties at the moment. And so here's what I want us to do. Let's zoom out for a bit, take a look from the 30,000 foot view and get some space around us and see this moment from some other angles. So what if? What we know or assume from the before times may not apply right now. So let's clear the decks. Let's let go of assumptions, like I said. Let's pretend to know nothing, question everything, and get into a stance of curiosity. Now, I have been listening to Brene Brown's stuff for a long time, but recently she had a podcast with someone named Priya Parker, who actually I have a new class that I'm teaching in the fall at the seminary about spiritual entrepreneurship. And Priya Parker's book is one that I'm using, The Art of Gathering, and it's just extraordinary. But in this podcast, Priya Parker and Brene Brown talked about that this is a moment to ask. And we shouldn't move forward without asking these things. What have we learned? What do we want to bring with us? And what was canceled that we secretly celebrated was canceled. So I want to give you an example. My friend Eric Elness just moved during pandemic to a new church in Portland. And they went through this process of asking these things, and they have been doing Zoom worship. They were doing Zoom worship when he got there, and he had been doing pre-recorded before, and he really kind of resisted Zoom worship, but then got into it because that's what they were doing. And one of the things that they did as they talked about these questions, what have we learned? What do we want to bring with us? What was canceled that we secretly celebrated? They looked at their context, and they are an urban church with a lot of people who come in from the suburbs. And when they really looked at their patterns before pandemic, they realized that regular churchgoers were maybe 2 times a month, and that was considered regular, right? Or considered a lot. Certainly there are people who went every Sunday, but a lot of people came intermittently, even though they felt a connection to the church. And during pandemic, they really enjoyed having a more regular connection with the church through Zoom than they normally had because they weren't driving in. And the other thing that they enjoyed is that because they did Zoom worship, they got to know more members in their church than they had ever known before. Because they would drive into church, they would have worship, they would talk to the people they usually talk to at coffee hour, and then they would drive home, right? And so in Zoom worship, they started meeting new people. And they said, we want to carry this forward in some way. How can we do this? So one of the innovative things that they are coming up with is that they're going to do in-person live worship in their sanctuary, which holds a lot more people than actually come, even in the before times, once a month, right? Or even once a series, or once a liturgical season. Once or twice, right? The choir gets more time to work. Their small choir, that needs more time to work on things. They can work on things more for that one thing than they, normally do if they're trying to do something for every week. They get everybody in the sanctuary, so it feels more full because people are only coming in in this one time that's, and then they're doing Zoom worship and refitting their fellowship hall into more of a studio so that people who do want to come into church every week can come and be part of the studio audience, let's say, the congregation in the fellowship hall. So they're reconfiguring their space for the number of people they'll actually have. So they're not doing Zoom in a great big huge sanctuary, but they're going to do it in a size specific, appropriate way, and then do big festival worship with a big potluck afterwards, and have people bring more food than they would bring to a normal potluck so that they can feed their neighbors who are economically challenged at the moment and living without housing. So here is an example of thinking out of the box by asking these questions. What have we learned? What do we want to bring with us? And what was canceled that we secretly celebrated, right? So these are some questions to ask yourself. Now, that particular example is for that context. You heard me tell you about the context that led them to this. What is your context that can help you rethink the ways that you are doing church without, and this is only possible, right, if we let go of that expectation that weekly Sunday morning worship is the way it has to be done. And we're going to look at history in a moment, and we're going to remember that it's not always been that way. All right, so this is a time, Priya Parker and Brene Brown said, for radical experimentation. We're in beta mode. We're in a moment of interruption that allows something that very few generations get at this level, right? Very few generations have been through the kind of thing that we are going through that allows us to stop for a moment and ask these seminal questions. It reminds me of when I have moved into new places in the second half of my life, where I'm like letting go of things. And when I move into a new place, I put all the big furniture in that I know I have to, sit in my house or whatever. And then I leave all the boxes in the garage, and things only come in one box at a time. They only come in if I'm actually going to use them, or if they have a place. So again, this is a moment for us to do this around our worship. So these are some other questions that Priya Parker has offered up, and I highly recommend folks look at her meeting makeover stuff. During the past 12 to 16 months, what did you miss and long for that you couldn't do with others, right? These are the things that we want to then highlight in our gatherings. What activities or way of spending time with other people did you not miss? What might you want to discard for good? What did we learn, create, or try anew during the pandemic that we want to bring with us? And what might we invent going forward? So again, these are really great questions for us to take the time to do this. And this is what we're going to be those of you who are signed up for my retreat, or those of you who are just hearing about it for the first time and might want to join us live or live stream. We are going to be looking at every liturgical season, but we're also, and themes and ideas, but we're also going to, alongside it, say, what are the different ways that we can bring this to people that will meet them where they are in this moment? So 3 concrete things. I want to share with you briefly something that I did this summer. And one of the things that I call myself, I have an alter ego, and her name is Beulah. And Beulah, Beulah is a pig. So this came about by saying, whenever I'm researching, I'm happy as a pig in you know what. So Beulah, I want you to engage your inner Beulah with me. And I want to describe to you just a little bit about my grant research that I did this summer. Because it gave me incredible hope. And I think it's one of the most exciting things that I've seen, and it's sparked my fire again. And that is, we looked at successfully entrepreneurial churches, churches who have taken their property and done something amazing with it that is outside of the box, entrepreneurial, right? And we looked at and tried to find what are the attributes of churches who were successful. We compared that with churches who aren't successful in order to get to these things. But real quickly, and I'm not going to go through this in detail because this is not a webinar on that research, although I will have one at some point. But some of the attributes were leader orientations that are learning and listening and focused on the abundance and not the scarcity. Comfort with risk and uncertainty. Oh my goodness. And so we're going to come back to this, but this is a big one, is that it's not about a certain skill set or set of a certain kind of charismatic leader. That didn't matter. It was that we have a learning mindset, a listening mindset, and a mindset of abundance. Also purpose in context. In other words, you are not just a church, any church, the church. You are this church in this neighborhood. And when you dig down into those details and figure out your purpose in your context, these churches then were able to understand their mission in that place. And so getting clear about their personal call, which is internal work that we can be doing, and external work, which is getting really familiar and being very clear about how you intersect with your neighborhood. Now, I have to say that this was the impetus for my Advent Christmas series, this research. And that's why I call it the Inn, Housing the Holy, because I was so inspired by churches really connecting with who they are in the neighborhood. Who are you as the inn? Can you make room in the inn, in your place? Can you get passionate about the needs of the community and see yourself as a house for the holy in the midst of this? The three churches, I'll just tell you briefly, one of them took their big old church that, a very small congregation was rattling around, and they began to give affordable office space for nonprofits in their neighborhood. They began to make affordable space for educational groups in their neighborhood. They created kind of the medieval parish model, back to that model, saying, how can we be a hub for the holy? And those of you who did my Lent series called Holy Vessels know that I was really pushing folks to understand how they could become a hub of renewed health. And many of you did vaccination clinics and testing clinics and mental health hubs and resourcing centers. And that's exactly what this series is about. And I'm so very excited that we can focus on the innkeeper, not as the sort of gets a bad rap, right? The innkeeper does. And actually the innkeeper is not biblical, not in there, but we in our imaginations have always talked about the innkeeper. But the innkeeper was an entrepreneur that said, actually, we don't have room, but let me think, where could we get you room? Right? So thinking outside of the box. And so I'm very excited about this series. And one of the things that I'm going to do as part of it in preparation for it is invite leaders of churches to read a book that I discovered in my research called We Aren't Broke. It's a brand new book, and it's about looking at the assets, the abundance of your church property and your neighborhood, and saying, how can we leverage this to not just survive or just try to get pledges in order to keep the doors open, but how can we create a business model and a financial model that can sustain not only us, but can also help the neighborhood? So I'm very excited about this. At the end of the webinar, I'll give you a discount code for 20% off of this series. If you're not a Worship Design Studio subscriber, of course, those of you who are, it's always free to you. And we're going to do a pre-sale until Labor Day. So just so you know, looking holistically, this is all about looking holistically, and then our worship helps us. Some of the other things that I researched that came out of our research is that change management, grief, relationships, conflict. This was huge in successful entrepreneurial churches. And so if that's something that you feel like you need help with, because we need to deal with our grief and our change, and we need to be good at doing that. And so getting better skills in that was one of the things that we learned. And then also understanding that we're part of an ecosystem, that you are not alone, and that we don't have to learn everything ourselves, pastors, if this is blowing your mind. We just have to learn how to collaborate. That's all. Learn relationships and dialogue and that kind of thing. I am doing a new certificate in spiritual entrepreneurship, both for people who want to do freelance things within and outside of the church, but also people who want to be entrepreneurial within their churches. And you can find out more about that at the link that Jenna is going to put in the chat. And we will make sure we have all these links in the notes for the recording. So friends, I'm going to focus a little bit on these three things that come out of that first slide, being a learner, a listener, and a looker. These are three things we can do right now in the meantime, because we don't have the answers. And so this is what we're going to do to begin to pique our curiosity so that we have the fodder to begin to be creative. So learning, Suzanne Stabile, who does the Enneagram, so this is part of my learning repertoire right now. I've been learning more about myself with the Enneagram. And before you begin to, in the chat, guess what I am, we are not just one number, but we have proclivities in certain numbers. And I am a creator. I am a producer. It is just part of who I am. And that's very much in the 3 category. But she's been doing some, a live stream, and she quoted Brother David Steindl-Rast saying, the antidote to exhaustion is not necessarily rest. It might be rest, right? Not necessarily rest, but the antidote to exhaustion is wholeheartedness. What a great concept to think about in these days. So Steindl-Rast calls us to ask, what are things that call you to dive in deep? That flow concept where hours go by as you're, reading about it, doing it, watching it, steep yourself in some of that. What brings you joy? Diving into these can be a way for you to be kind to yourself, he says. So I've been reading business books about start with your why, which also applies to churches, right? What is your reconnecting with? What is our purpose? What is our why? And that will help us move forward in this time. This is a time when we can take a moment and re-ask that question. I've been looking at the Enneagram, as I said. I've been diving into brain science stuff because I love that. Priya Parker, Brene Brown, and sisters. Anybody out there listening to the Gifts of Imperfection podcast with Brene and her sisters? Oh my gosh, so good and great to check our perfectionism kind of traits in this moment. I put myself through an entrepreneur immersion session. And so all of these things are to get my creativity going. I know that these are the things that work. What works for you? Now, I don't want to seem holier than thou or like I've got my act together, because I also have strings of nights where I eat ice cream every night, right? So I'm not holier than thou, people. I am just saying that there's some productive coping skills. And like everybody, I have some other coping mechanisms. Can I get an amen, right? So it's okay to have all the feels, but I'm just trying to say what we have in this research found is that people who are continuing to learn and to up their skills, and I just gave you in that research some of the skills that you can up that's going to help you in your church at this time. So listen is about being curious with empathy, doing in what entrepreneurs calls customer discovery. So making a safe conversations for people to get really honest. Like how many times a month did you usually come, in the before times, did you come to worship? Or do you listen? How do you get your information and your inspiration? Is it listening to music in the car or a podcast, or like doing these discovery things to really find out where people are getting fed right now? Is it at night with movies? Is it at night when they sit down, they're exhausted and they turn on the TV? Well, maybe that's the time that you could provide something that is inspirational, brief on a YouTube, and people can just put it on their TV and have that as a ritual before they watch their movie that takes them, out of their worries. So the customer discovery, listen, and then look. This is the one about abundance, right? We would call this a growth mindset in the entrepreneur speak, a growth mindset instead of a fixed mindset. So here's something radical. As we think about worship, let's look at the history of worship and how that actually helps us understand the abundant story that we are part of that can help us let go of the expectations about getting back to the way we've done it in the last 50 years, the last 80 years, and remember there are other ways to do it. So it's a new age. Phyllis Tickle, historian, sociologist, theologian, wrote a book called The Age of the Spirit. And she said every 500 years, there's a major shift, right? And so she talks about the Great Transformation, right? Rome becoming an empire. So that's 2,000 years ago. Cultures emerged, huge influence on the rise and spread of Christianity because of all the road systems and the moving and the traveling. Huge, major change in our world. The Great Decline and Fall in the 6th century ushered in the Dark Ages, but birthed monasticism, right? So birthed this different way of praying, of being together in community that was a necessity out of the Dark Ages. The Great Schism in the 11th century, the separation of Eastern Orthodox Christianity and Western Roman Catholicism, huge shift. And now, and the Great Reformation, of course, in the 16th century. Protestantism was one of the outcomes of that, but it was the massive cultural, intellectual, and economic shifts that fueled that Protestant movement that made a huge difference in society, in our world. And it made a huge difference in our worship, enlightenment. And we began to focus on sitting and listening and coming together for regular worship in ways that were more educational and more verbal linguistic than the sort of experiential, occasional kinds of ways that people were doing. And yet, even Wesley in his time said that people were only coming to church every once in a while. And so this is not a new thing, my friends. Even at the height of huge, this church and state kind of Christianity, people were only coming every once in a while. So it's kind of human nature, isn't it? So it's perhaps taking the pressure off of, I'm not interesting enough. I'm not good enough. The worship isn't good enough. People aren't coming. There's a whole lot of reasons why people aren't coming, including those reasons I just said. So we do want to make sure we're doing sensory rich worship that speaks to the heart of the matter, but also there's a lot of other reasons. So the great emergence, she calls it in the 21st century, is equal in disruption to that one 2,000 years ago. And she calls it the age of the Spirit. God rest her soul, she unfortunately died too soon. We need her voice. I wonder what she would say today if she had lived in this time of pandemic. I was on a think tank with her when she was still alive toward the end of her life. And we were in the kitchen one morning getting ready for our session and having breakfast together. And I said, Phyllis, tell me more about how I can engage this age of the Spirit. And she said, honey, you are the age of the Spirit. And I think what she was saying to me is that what comes naturally to me, this attitude of curiosity and discovery and creating and a willingness to question and experiment, this is the Holy Spirit. This is the age of the Holy Spirit. The Holy Spirit is with us, will always be with us, nudging us, always inviting us to see more than we can ask or imagine. So Tickle said that the window of shifts in the age may take 100 years to make the shift. But friends, I think this pandemic threw us in the midst of this great emergence time, threw us into overdrive. And so it's not going to take 100 years. We're in the middle of everything shifting right now. It put not just gas, but Batman jet fuel in this transition. And so we need to be thinking about how we're going to address the spiritual needs of people, because that is not going away ever. So the forms may change, but the need is always there. So I used to do 3,000 years of worship history, only the highlights in my workshops. When I first started doing workshops 20 some years ago, I would do this tour. And I'm just going to briefly say it continues to inform us. Miriam at the Red Sea, it's our earliest biblical record of worship. Women dancing and drumming and singing after they crossed successfully through the Red Sea. This was contextual. It was situational. It was occasional. right? It was very different from what we know today. Temple worship, when they got to where they were going and they got money and power, it was foundational. It became professional, because that's what happens when you get money and power and places and closets, and you get people, the right people doing the right things. And then the diaspora, the temple is destroyed, and then it became about survival and became more relational and smaller, focusing on identity. Huge explosion of creativity and Psalms of Lament and the prophets. And so again, it changes. The early church was also about survival, small groups, house churches, relational, missional, taking care of each other. Could it be that in these cycles of history coming around and around, that we might be looking more like the early church than the mid 20th century church? And that's okay. But we have to think about, how does that change our worship? How does that change the ways that we gather? The state church, again, we get money, Middle Ages, money and power and prestige. It becomes political, it becomes professional. The Reformation becomes educational, more regular in things that I have mentioned just a moment ago. Early American worship was a panoply of all of these things, because we had the invisible church, relational, familial, in secret, right? Smaller, missional, taking care of each other, right? We had frontier worship, which was occasional, festival, contextual, situational. And we had urban churches, which started to look more like anytime you have buildings and money and professionals, right? So this history of worship continues to be so informative. And what it does is says to us that, yes, in times where buildings for exclusive and selective use, that's always been part of the cycle of history. But that's not the only way we've worshiped. Worshiping communities have always been around. Daily prayer, spiritual practices, house church, occasional festival worship, pilgrimage, stational, worship in nature. These are all things that have always been part of our practices in Judeo-Christian tradition. And they can be again. Worship is just one expression within the ecosystem that is the church. And the history of worship tells us that there's not just one way to express worship, one way to do or be the church. So in this time where we're trying to figure out how to do things, how to move forward, I want us, and those of you who are coming to the retreat, I want you to really think about this between now and mid-September, when the retreat is. I want you to really be thinking about the ecclesiological question, right? That's the fancy theological word for who are we as the church? Where are we, right? Purpose and context. And what opportunities do we have in this moment to reach people where they are in a way that we weren't forced to do? We were a little more complacent because people were showing up on Sunday morning. But this has been a changing thing over the last few decades. It's about time that we ask these deep questions. So if we are to walk alongside people in their spiritual journey, how do we find out where people are walking, when they're walking, how they're walking, right? To use a metaphor, or rolling if you don't walk. So I know. So let me just say, while I'm on the retreat, because this is the opening sort of session to get you primed and ready for our time in September, let me just say a few things about the retreat. We are going to be looking at variations on a theme, different ways to present the material in each one of the liturgical seasons. It's September 19th through 22. That's Sunday night through Wednesday noon. And so we will start right away with Advent on Sunday night, and then we will move through, each session moves us through each season of the liturgical year. And we will look at the theological context, the biblical context. We'll look at what's happening in the lectionary, lectionaries, and we will also talk about variations on a theme. How do we think about the content of the worship and how that might invite us to different ways of experimenting with format of the worship? This is going to be a very different retreat. Those of you who've come to these retreats every year, it's going to be very different in that way. And I'm very excited about that. So if you're interested in coming, we're going to do it live or live stream. If you're comfortable live, we're in Denver at Lakewood United Methodist Church. And I keep looking at the numbers. Denver is doing very well in terms of vaccination rates, so that's very hopeful, but we will continue to keep an eye on that. If we have to go just to live stream, we'll do that, and we will make sure that everybody is shifted from that live price point to the live stream price point. But it will be so good to be together if we can. So we're going to keep looking at that closely. And also, for those of you who want to be part of live or live stream, we have a $50 discount through tomorrow night with a, you'll see on that page how you can get that discount. But let me just say, here is the place where we're going to be, friends. Those of you who are coming live, live stream, you'll see this view closer up, of course, in the chancel. But these chairs will be replaced with tables and chairs, and will be spread out as much as we need to be. I have chosen this church because it is one of the churches that is looking at how they use their space differently. And this is a pano picture of what they've done with their fellowship hall, which is now permanently a place where kits, backpacks for kids who are in economic insecurity, food is packed into backpacks to take home for the weekend. And they have every room of their church they're looking at and saying, what can we do with our property? This is just a little video of the way that we usually are at the retreat around tables. But for the live stream, we are now going to do this in our virtual studio that we've created during pandemic. And it is made up of technology that allows you to, when you're close to each other, you see each other on video. And then when you move away from each other, then it fades out. So like in real life, you get to talk to people in groups. You'll watch the live stream on our webpage, and then come here to our plenary room where we have recreated the tables around which you're usually in the space. And those tables are set up so that when you're sitting around with other people, you have a private, you only see the 6 people that you're sitting with on your video. So this is going to be a great way. A couple things you can do. You can send your pastor live and then meet up with your team on a live stream for during this times when you're actually planning after I present. You can also meet up with other worship design studio churches and plan some collaborations so that you can be producing things together and lightening each other's load. And as you're seeing right now, you can also go in and you can learn about every part of the process. In fact, you could do that right now and go in and check it out. There's also a beach where you can hang out and talk to other people and meet other people. It's just a much more live feeling than sitting on Zoom for an entire retreat. So it's a lot of fun, and I'm excited about having you all with us. So please, if you are interested in spending more time talking about each liturgical season, and we're going to get a little bit into Advent here in just a moment, then I invite you to do that. All right. So wrapping this up, friends, we're going to look at variations on a theme: sanctuary enhancing, community facing, and rhythm flexible ideas. So those of you who are beginning to look at themes in the worship design studio that are appropriate for this time, I just want to flag some of them. These are themes that I think are really important in this exhausting, confusing, scary time for humanity. The tie that binds, focusing on community and that thing. What is it that binds us together? It's not just the way we've always done church. Creativity, the theology of creativity is a really good one. And these would be for ordinary time. So in the fall and after the first of the year and Easter season and next summer, all of these work in there. Leading causes of life, about thriving. So instead of the leading causes of death, this is based on a book that's about the leading causes of life. Abundance, the moving out of scarcity is a series on abundance. Would be great for your pledge, you're focusing on money time. and moving out of a sense of scarcity into a sense of abundance. A way out of no way, that'll really preach around how have we in the past, how did the biblical characters who are in crisis make a way out of no way, and how do we? Spiritual practices is focus of the spiritual affective disorders, the SAD series. And then we also have support. Friends, if you are new to Worship Design Studio, I get so excited because these are available. These are things we've done in the past, but if you're new to Worship Design Studio, they're new to you and your community. Heart of the Matter was something that I did at the very beginning of pandemic, but it still works. And if you have to go back into lockdown, this is a series that can be done. It's focusing about house worship and table worship. Get people together in pods to do it together, safe pods. Come to the table about communion. So, it's not just about how you worship, but what we focus on in worship can really help get us through this time. So Advent, of course, we've got the new one that I'm very excited about. But if you have not been with Worship Design Studio for very long, you may not have done Angels Among Us, which would be fantastic for this year. This focus on do not be afraid, or God Bless Us Everyone that looks at past, present, and future. The redemption of Scrooge uses that time-tested story to get us to think about how we go through life. So those are some themes that I want you to look at before you come to the retreat, so that you are kind of thinking about what themes speak to, and not that you have to use our themes. I teach you how to create your own themes, and so it's not that this is the only way to do it, but it does help take the pressure off and jumpstart you. Okay, so sanctuary enhancing. Configure yourselves for the size that you are. If you only have a few people coming to worship right now or in the future because this pandemic, reconfigure the way that you are in the seating, in the pews. You might still have to have safe distancing, but you might also have people who are vaccinated who are coming to worship. Here's a thing I heard recently. Consider that you are pastoring a 2-point charge. A lot of people do it. The people who are in your sanctuary and the people who are not. Doesn't mean that you have to do both the same thing. And we've been talking about this for a year and a half. There's so many ideas that I gave in the reboot last fall about the pandemic edition for doing online worship. And I believe that you can take what you're doing on Sunday morning, you can record that, you can excerpt that, make a shorter version for those at home. You can do Zoom worship, you can do all different kinds of things, but I think it's really important to be asking ourselves when we are coming back, how do our current worship practices and faith practices really leverage embodiment and togetherness? That's the thing that we missed. So if we come and we just come back to our big rattly sanctuaries where we're spread out, that is not necessarily going to really leverage that idea of being together. So maybe we need to have people sitting in, if you have flexible seating, sitting in more of a circle so they can see each other, or have times in the service where they can see one another. How do we bring back that sense of togetherness? That is, there was a blog by Leslie Van Milligan who asked that question. I'm going to have Jenna put that in the chat because it was really a wonderful blog. Except that some of the changes and skills you gained in pandemic are here to stay, and figure out how to sustain these creative endeavors, not as a stopgap, but making it sustainable. Partner with other churches. This is happening in Worship Design Studio to share the load of creating things. Rewatch last year's pandemic edition. Do things in batches. I've been teaching all year about this, but letting go of the idea that we're just doing this until we can get over this moment. Maybe accepting and then figuring out how we can be more sustainable using projection technology. This is just the way that we're going to keep drawing people together. Keep having people and families record readings and show them in the space, even if those people are actually there. It's more accessible. You can use it in your offline, in your online online worship as well. And so you're getting people to create these things like they were doing in pandemic, but also they can be more comfortable recording in their own settings or recording it over. They don't get as nervous. It includes people who would never be comfortable walking up to the microphone, right? So being more inclusive about who it is that is leading in our worship. Keep those video editing skills happening. Keep using photos and videos provided and produced by a variety of folks, including Worship Design Studio. Keep striving to find people who have fun putting this together, near or far away. They don't have to be in your community. I've been including ideas for media in Worship Design Studio series for decades. But now you're actually doing them because you see that you can, and you can see that it has benefit beyond just pandemic. For instance, in the inn, you might make for offering, you might make a little video piece about a nonprofit in your community that you're going to partner with to help support them, to help make more room in the inn for everyone. So this is really the third category I'm going to get to, that's rhythm flexible. But since we're here talking about the sanctuary, create come and go hours, right? Sunday morning is not always convenient to come into church. Doesn't mean that people don't yearn for a sense of the sanctuary. Create a self-guided worship journey, an open house hours, including a way to turn music on in the space. Allow people to enjoy and connect with the space without having to adhere to only specific hours. This could be safer for people who don't feel safe coming and being in the space with a lot of people singing right now, but they want to be in the space. So create intentional ways for people to come in. Those of us who lead worship and who are on staff at churches, I don't know about you, but I love sitting in that quiet, empty sanctuary. It's so awesome. Create a way for more people to have those kind of moments. Use a scheduling program if you want to make sure that people are not coming in at the same time. All right, community facing, create DIY versions of the scripts. I'm going to be showing you in the retreat exactly how to do that with the in Advent scripts. Written forms, easily led by anyone, a small group, a dinner group, a written form easily read by anyone as a devotional booklet at home. Offer them to passersby, like those little library nooks that people have in front of their houses. Let passersby take one and let them have you'll never know, but the Holy Spirit will know how these people are engaging with that material. You can give them to friends and family. Create a podcast form of your worship, an audio only recording uploaded to your website so that people can listen to it on the way to work. Again, meeting people where they are in the rhythms of their life. We have got to accept that this is the way that we need to expand our hospitality, friends. And we can take the same content that we design for worship and we can make it happen in different forms. Make an experience, stations outside the church. Use hay bales for the inn. It's perfect. Make a labyrinth out of hay bales. Advertise your open house, your sanctuary open house hours as a self-guided devotional time. Community facing, reaching people that we've never reached before. And then rhythm flexible. Friends, this is, I've already started to allude to this, but here's some things that just came to me as I was trying to brainstorm rhythm flexible things. And it could have to do with, the particular series. A lot of you are doing our travel series right now called Quest. I was thinking about a podcast, just an audio only podcast recorded thing, interviewing people in your church about their travels, could be many years ago, who they met, what they learned, how their life has changed because they came into contact with a place and a people different from their own. Create pod groups to worship together. As I mentioned, doing Heart of the Matter, those series that are about house church, early church, are focused on the meal as a way of furthering our faith journey. Using the series Emerge, which everybody who is signed up for the retreat is getting this series that I did several years ago about Metamorphosis, and do a field trip to the butterfly park or a garden of some kind, and have a short devotional made up of that material for that moment. Create a web page. In fact, I'm going to show you here in just a moment a web page of all the ways. So an example of this time flexible kinds of things. In fact, let me just go to that right now. New share and show you what I have kind of made up. Now, no one church may do all of these things, but this is a pretend web page. Welcome to Advent and Christmas at First Church Anytown. Our Advent Christmas theme invites us to make more room in the inn of our lives for compassion and hospitality to bring more hope, peace, love, and joy to the world. There are many ways to engage with our worship and service in this time. We know the rhythms of life fluctuate wildly these days, and so we are offering several rhythms of worship for you to choose from. All the following opportunities are based on the content of our worship theme, so no matter how you engage, you will find a meaningful time of connecting with the holy, so that you can experience making room in your life for feeding and caring for your spiritual self and finding a way to offer your love to others. And then a little note that says, always remember that our Stevens ministry team and pastoral staff are ready to connect with you for a phone call, Zoom meetup, etc. You belong, you are loved, you are not alone. Click here to get in touch. So reminding people there are many ways to connect, and they don't have to feel bad if they can't come every Sunday morning, or if they're not comfortable coming on Sunday morning. There are many ways. So here's my brainstorming about this Advent series. Sanctuary worship and open house hours, right? So open house hours Thursday through Saturday through Advent from 4 to 7. Right. And then here's a little link to go to the worship recordings. I even say, a little bit about the barn door, which is our anchor image for the series. And this would be a lovely place for you to take your photos for your Christmas cards, right? A little incentive to come in and experience the sanctuary in the off hours. An Advent one-day retreat. What if you invited people to a retreat that would sort of encapsulate the journey of Advent that you're going to do in Sunday morning worship? But also offers other things, age-appropriate groups, eat, worship, journal, talk, create gift packages for area families in need. This is, of course, only if this is safe to do so, my friends. But if it's a small group doing these one-day retreats, maybe you do a couple of them to spread it out. You'll go home with a devotional booklet for the rest of Advent to do at home. Yes, it's totally okay to put this day and Christmas Eve on your calendar as the way you participate with your church family this year, right? So giving people options, time flexible options. Here's the Inn podcast. Do you spend time listening to podcasts on your work commute or while walking the dog? This year, we're offering a podcast based on our theme, the Inn, Housing the Holy. If the best time for you to be settled, listen, and get inspired, give it a try. Just bookmark this page, open before you head out, and enjoy the sounds of Advent and Christmas from our musicians, and be inspired by our interviews with our nonprofit partners that are helping our community thrive, right? So it's not just a recording of Sunday morning worship, but it's something that would be inspirational as people are going to work or whenever they listen to their podcast. I listen while I walk the dog. Housing the Holy dinner groups, right? So doing small group worship, creating the worship scripts in a way that is easy, pre-dinner, post-dinner, prayers, liturgies, kind of thing, easy, and then food, right? So little safe pods. DIY devotionals, right? So creating those things for people who actually do their spiritual nurture in the form of journaling and having quiet time, devotionals. I know it's going to be hard to have the metrics of the way that people are engaging, but that's okay. Just the fact that you create the possibility, means that you are following the Holy Spirit in many different ways. Making room mini retreat, right? So this is a 2-hour evening retreat that focuses on, this is just an example of coming to learn from leaders what they've been talking about in terms of making the church a more hospitable, a more integrated into the community place to be, sustaining place to be. So that is, those are some ideas about rhythm flexible ways of worshiping in this time. And then there's, this was a fantastic post on Facebook of somebody who throughout COVID has been creating these little service projects that people can be part of. Not everybody is going to be part of every one. Some of it's building ramps for folks who need ramps in their houses. Some are goodie bags for their nursing homes. Some are sewing stuff. There are tons of different ways that they've been doing this, and they're looking for more ways. And so I know so many of you have been doing this kind of thing. But this is part of the metrics of how we are worshiping. Each one of these times when people get together to do these things, you can create a short little prayer and statement that they can read before and after. Or if they're doing it at home alone, they can do that on their own. You can also have people doing this at home alone, but on Zoom, just hanging out on Zoom. And doing these things, and have a time, we're going to start at 3:00. We're going to have a short devotional, and then we're just going to work together. We're all going to be at our sewing machines, and we're going to work together. Right. So rhythm flexible. All right, friends. So that's those are my ideas. Yes, I knew I was going to go over an hour. I should have told Jenna not to promise you an hour, because it's just, there's so many things that we can do and imagine in this time. I want to remind you that you can get 20% off if you're not a Worship Design Studio member from now until Labor Day with Advent 20 at worshipdesignstudio.com/thein. And I also, there we go, want to remind you that the early bird discount for our planning retreat, either on site or online, it runs out tomorrow night, midnight. So if you at all would like to continue this conversation through looking at these kinds of things and worship ideas and thematic ideas for every liturgical season, that's where you can still sign up to come. We still have some spaces available in Denver. And remember that even if you sign up and then something happens, we can easily slot you back into the live stream if we need to. So that's their reminder that everybody is getting this series called Emerge, who has signed up for the retreat. So this is a 6-week series that will help you during September and October while you're planning ahead, getting ahead. It helps us jumpstart you ahead. This is one of our DIY series, which means we give you ideas for every week, every worship art, but they're not fully scripted. You put them in your own order of worship. All right, we're going to finish out in a moment with this song, but let me go to Jenna and find out if we have some questions that we can go through. And I realize that some may need to hop off because of time constraints, but all of this will be in the recording. So just fast forward to the question part if you need to hop off. All right, Jenna, what do we have?
All right. So a question about the retreat and content. Is the retreat something that will still be useful for those of us who don't follow the lectionary?
Absolutely. Yeah. So I give you what I see in the lectionary, but I also give you ideas, theological theme ideas that don't follow the lectionary. And in the Worship Design Studio, we have both lectionary, non-lectionary. We have some narrative lectionary, but absolutely.
Right. Another question. We've got a few folks who asked about the butterfly Ephesians video and really enjoyed that you shared. Is that going to be available as a standalone that folks can share with their churches?
I will make it so.
Okay. Wonderful.
We'll create a download so you can download that.
Yes, that would be great. And I let folks know we are going to send out the slides in the chat as well, if anyone still has any questions about that. So we had a question about the 3,000 years of worship history. Is this written up somewhere that people could come back to and learn more about? Yeah, so that is in my very first worship book. I don't know when that was published, 20 years ago, maybe. That is, and Jenna, I don't know if we have that. I used to have that as I do have that as a handout from that book. So a couple ways you could get it is by getting the worship workshop. It's still available. It's amazing how many people still buy that, use that. The worship workshop, you can get that on Amazon.
Jenna, let's do a little reconnaissance and see if we put that handout as a handout in the Worship Design Studio, and we'll put that in the notes as well. It's a lot of fun when you do it. Like I've had a lot of confirmation classes do it as part of their confirmation class, because they learn a lot of history. And then there's a way you actually take your congregation through your church in different places, and you sort of reenact different time periods. So it's a lot of fun.
Yes, and I just put that link to Marcia's worship workshop book in the chat for anyone who is interested. Yeah. Okay, we had a couple of questions about general live stream worship practices. I would love to hear ideas for creating hands-on experiential worship for people who are at home. We usually provide materials to interact with in the sanctuary.
Yeah. So the Reboot Your Worship Pandemic Edition that I did last fall was a place where I did like 6 weeks worth of these ideas. But there was one in particular, the one that was about congregational participation, that I think is one of the most packed webinars of that whole series. And I want to make that available to everybody. The reboot was available for, just people who are Worship Design Studio subscribers year round, and people who just got that package. But that one session, Jenna, I think we need to just put it out there because we're having to reintroduce some of those things until we get out of this. We're going to have to keep working on that. And here, I just went against what I said in this webinar. Remember that we can do this. This is not just this time, but we can implement these things into the future, the church of the future. So if you would make a note of that, Jenna, and we'll find that webinar, and we will also include that link to the YouTube video in the notes.
Awesome. Okay, another question that we had about kind of the attention span that folks have with this age of online worship. My understanding is that folks have been watching many live stream worship services like bees and butterflies jumping from flower to flower. Buzz stats indicate folks are spending only about 15 to 25 minutes really engaged. So your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that we can't make huge assumptions about everybody. So here's what I think. I think that your usual regular churchgoers who love going to church are going to watch your hour-long live stream from the sanctuary. That's what's happening in the church where my partner is the pastor. Those people who, don't feel comfortable coming back, but they just wish they could be in the sanctuary, are watching their live stream, and they're watching it all the way through. But there's people who are in the sanctuary, there's people who are watching the live stream, but there's a third group, and that's a group that's not engaging because it's not part of, they're not longing for that. I want to see everything. I want to, listen all the way through everything. So there is something to doing a shortened format. And so some of those things like the podcast or the online version, you don't have to have $10,000 to $20,000 worth of live streaming equipment. If you do, awesome. That's great. But you can also just record that service and then repackage it, edit it down, get rid of all of the walkie pieces in between, get rid of the announcement, whatever, package it down into a shorter time span and upload that. Podcast would be a different format. So instead of a sermon, for a 20-minute sermon on a podcast, you're going to do more of an interview kind of thing. You might have 5-10 minutes of talking about something, and then you might have an excerpt of something, an interview of some kind, and then conclude that up. Think about different formats, different ways. And I know we're so attached to the things we learned in seminary, like exegeting for a 20-minute sermon. Yeah, great. Now, let's also think about how we package that for a short devotional that also packs a punch. So I do think that there are different time spans, attention spans, but I think that's true of everything. And we can't make a generalized kind of thing. I also want to say right now that I experienced a church. I went live in the sanctuary to a church that's trying to democratize Zoom worship so that they actually have the Zoom screen in the sanctuary. And so as you're sitting there, it's like you came to the sanctuary to be in a Zoom worship. And I know there's a lot out there about making the experience the same for everybody. I'm not a fan. I'm not a fan because I think it destroys the integrity of both of those art forms, right? So the in-person art form is an art form because there are bodies in the space, and you treat it differently than the art form, actually, that is Zoom worship, that can be beautiful, can be intimate, can be all those things, but is for that. So I think when you start to try to meld everything for the sake of time, because you don't want to be a 2-point charge, you want to be a 1-point charge, I think you're making things more difficult for yourself. And that's just my opinion. Consultants have opinions about everything, not answers for everything, opinions about everything. So take that with a grain of salt, but this is just what I think every form has an integrity. So let's just go for that integrity in each one of the forms. Okay, I'm done with that.
Okay, that's so well said. We got a couple of questions that were just kind of related to exactly what you were just speaking about, Marcia. And one of those is, how do we do all that without burning out for pastors?
Yeah. So I did a lot of this during lockdown about how you create things in batches. And that's what we do in the Worship Design Studio. We do not do the creative process every week. You cannot sustain that. So we front load the creative process. We have production times where you are immersive into it. And then you're able to have less of that production time throughout the series, right? This is so vitally important. And I know that a lot of us got like, oh, I can't plan ahead, right, anymore. And I get it. It's understandable. We're at the end of our ropes, but we're going to have to ramp it back up. And that's one of the reasons why I do what I do, because I want to cut off a lot of that creative production work for you. I want to jumpstart you so you come in the middle of that. You get ready for that series so that you don't have to do the creative process every darn week. It's not sustainable. And because I want you to have lively, sensory rich worship in the ways that you can. And so if you're not part of the Worship Design Studio, I want to say that whether it's us or somebody else, but you can get help. Don't try to do it alone right now. Until we find a different rhythm, a rhythm that is repeatable, that we know because the pandemic settles down or what have you, but get some help. And I really, I'm happy to be that help for thousands of congregations, but there's other help as well. So whether it's us or somebody else, don't do it alone. If you're on the Worship Design Studio website, collaborate with other churches. Get help that way. Do the same series and then help create. You guys have a choir. You do those. Create, or you have an ensemble. Can you create that video of that? And we'll use it. You'll use it, and we'll do the small group devotional book. Kind of thing.
Awesome. I just see a couple more.
All right.
Folks are used to waking up on Sunday and having access to our service. When we go back, we will be recording the service, editing it, and sending it out. We won't get out until noon, and so I worry that we'll lose folks because of that timing. Any suggestions?
Yeah, I was just talking about this yesterday with somebody. Okay, number one, people's brains are flexible. We know this. This is science. And so they can get used to a different rhythm. They can get used to a later rhythm. I also think that one solution is doing a rehearsal, and I'm a big fan of rehearsal for Sunday morning worship. Do bits of it that you're going to create for your shortened piece in rehearsal during the week, sometime before. Your musicians are probably going to practice, record it, create a shortened recording that you can drop the same time you do your worship. So again, that's adding more. You're a pastor in a 2-point charge. That's, we have to start getting real about that. And that's actually going to be true outside of pandemic as well. If we can think about 2 different charges, those whose habit is Sunday morning worship and those whose habit is not, whether that's because they can't come or because they work on Sunday morning or because they don't go to church. That's just not their habit. How else are they going to get the material? All right. Oh, it's all, again, I don't have all the answers. I'm just kind of brainstorming with you. That's all I'm doing is brainstorming with you.
For sure. All right. The last question I see is a logistics question about the podcast idea that you mentioned earlier. So if we include music in our podcast, will that trigger some copyright issues? How might folks work around that?
Yeah. So here's the thing. Facebook has become unbearable in their policing. I'm sure many of you have noticed, even if you have permission, they're messing with it. So this stuff is going to continue to happen as long as you are posting on public, on a provider like that. You have what you need to do a podcast right now. You don't have to go through a podcasting service. You can create an audio recording in the free software that you have on your computer, the same free software that you're using for your video editing, or if you bought video editing software, you can do a recording on that same thing. You're just going to export it as an audio only, and you're going to post that on your website, right? You don't have to post it in iTunes or in a podcasting thing because you're not trying to get national listenership, right? So the most important thing to do is to look at the web builder that you're using and how you can embed a file, an audio file or a video file or a live stream key right into a page rather than doing that on another provider. This would be well worth your research skills to figure this out, depending on the web design page thing that you're using. So that's what I would suggest to all of you who are having to deal with getting shut down for things you actually have the right to do. And that is on your social media, point to your web page where you have that embedded rather than embedding it in somebody else's program. Does that make sense?
Great suggestion. Yes, that is good. I hope everyone who wondered about that was listening. That's so great. All right. That I think is all the questions that we've gotten. We've got them all answered.
Great. Oh my gosh, friends. Thank you so much for hanging with me. I'm going to sing a little hymn as we go off. And it is a hymn by my dear friend, Professor Ruth Duck. She happens to go to the church where my partner is the pastor. And we sang this on Sunday, and it's always great to be able to sing one of Ruth Duck's hymns in the worship service where she's present. What a saint, what a beautiful person who has an incredible catalog of work. And this reminds us that we're in the age of the Spirit and that the Holy Spirit is with us, will always be with us. And when we get to verse 3, melt away the masks we wear. Remember, that's a metaphor. We do want you to wear your masks. We want you to get your vaccine. We want us to survive this pandemic. We want humanity to come together. And so we pray that. And so I pray for you this song to finish. Living Spirit, holy fire, burning bright to light our way, blaze among us and inspire lives that praise you day by day. Warm us, draw your people near, whether that's online or in person, when our love draws weak or cold, free our frozen hearts from fear, that each story may be told. Melt away the masks we wear, hiding what we know and feel, risking growth we want to share. Love in action, love that's real. Open hearts affirm us all, many splendored one in you. We embrace the work, the call. You are making all things new. My friends, may you know that you are more than enough. More than enough, each and every one of you. You are enough, you do enough, and you are not alone. You are not alone. You don't have to have all the answers. Just get curious. Bottom line. And if we can be of help in the Worship Design Studio or the practical resources for churches, we are happy to be in ministry with you. Thank you so much for all you are, for all you do, and all you will do as we carry the good news forward in so many different ways. Blessings. Bye-bye.